this video outlines how to install the Autoscan Terminal, the Windows app version, for an individual user, and then goes along and explains how you can then deploy that in the enterprise so that the user's Windows credentials can be used to limit the access to MediPath. So what we want to do first is go to the installer location. Now, at the moment, that is right here. So this is Autoscan, welcome.com.au, Autoscan, AS Terminal, installer, and to the publish page. So we're currently running on 08014. To install on any Windows 10 computer, remembering Windows 10 is required, click install, and that will download the setup. Now, you might get this warning about the setup being not commonly used, which is true. This is a brand new application. Obviously, nobody else has used it just at the moment. So we do want to keep it. And next we want to run the setup. So we can just run it from there. Okay, so first thing we'll see is that it's starting to install, and importantly, we're running Autoscan Terminal CL, and that it is digitally signed with the Qualcomm certificate. So we know it's the right version. We haven't got a hacked version. So we'll run install. Okay, and so we get to this screen here. So by default, it tries to go to a server called demo server with a demo user. So that's not what we want. So as the instructions say there, if you want to change the configuration, use Alt plus the backtick button. So Alt backtick will open up the config file, and we can see here there's some information up here which we'll come to later. This one again we will use later, but importantly what we want to do first off is just set the host name and the user. So when we do the login conversation, when it sees login, it's going to answer with this user, and the host name is the name of the server that we want to connect to. Now in our case, we don't really have a real MediPath system here. We have a simulated one. So I will put in MediPath _sim for simulated, and the user is MediPath, and that should be enough for us to get going on this particular in the first step. So yes, we would like to save it. Okay, so we can now close this page. So, but we do want to go to the Windows terminal. And now you see we're trying to connect to MediPath as the MediPath user. Now the password for MediPath, the first problem you're going to discover is that with SSH, you can't have a blank password. So in MediPath, you're probably traditionally used to having the MediPath Linux user automatically log in, but in SSH that does not work. So all we get is we lose the screen. So what we'd like to do is instead use Telnet to log into MediPath and set a temporary password. Now there is a different way to do it instead of setting a temporary password, but we'll give that example later on. So for right now, we'll Telnet to MediPath sim, and the login is MediPath, and without any password, we can log in. Now you can see this is actually a simulation of MediPath. This is not really a MediPath system. All we're doing is outlaying or outputting the text that you would see in a MediPath system. There's not really a MediPath on this machine. But what we need to do is first clear up the screen a little bit. Then what we need to do is use the password command to set a temporary password for the MediPath user. And if we just use password with no default, it'll ask us to change our own password. So if we give a password, a simple password like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and it's too simplistic. Okay, we'll try a better one. I'm going to put TEMP PASSWORD, temp password. And now to retype that, TEMP PASSWORD exclamation mark. Okay, and so now we have a password on the MediPath user, so that we can now log in using SSH. So remember, the point of this was that SSH does not allow you to have a blank password. So we've temporarily enabled a password on the Medipath system, the Medipath user, so that we can use SSH to connect with a password. So I'm going to now go to the Start menu and start up our Autoscan Terminal. So now when we get to this prompt, we'll see the password for Medipath, and if I put in temp password exclamation mark, we should now, something happened. This is the next thing we need to deal with. So yes, it looks like it accepted a password, but we've got some other problem. Now, so to explain what that problem actually is, for demonstration purposes, I'll use PuTTY, which is a different SSH tool, to demonstrate what's going on. So if I start from the Start menu and start up PuTTY, so go to PuTTY and I log into Medipath Sim. If I click Open now, you'll see that we get this alert. So this alert saying, okay, this SSH program, PuTTY, has never connected to this machine before, and it's asking, is it the machine you expect it to be? Is this the fingerprint you're expecting to see for this server? Now, it could be that somehow or other your DNS server has been hacked, or that could be a hacker server. Very, very unlikely. But in this case, what we're basically saying is that that Autoscan Terminal is having this problem right now. It assumes that all the configuration has been done already and that the server has been accepted. So how do we enable trust between Autoscan Terminal and our Medipath server? So what we do is we cancel the PuTTY, and if we look in Windows under the user, so if we go, for example, and find it, current users, and then I go to me on this machine, you'll see that there is this .ssh folder. So that is the default folder for SSH configuration on Windows and Unix. Unix, it's home/SSH. On Windows, it's the user's profile. So you can go user profile.ssh and user profile. If I get and that will take us to there. So what we see that Autoscan Terminal has added this unknown host file here. We have a look at that. It's saying that Medipath Sim has a fingerprint of that. So that's quite similar to the message we saw before in PuTTY. So to enable the trust, when there's only one server, in our case there is, we can just say, okay, we're going to take away the unknown server, unknown host from the front of the file. You'll see that there's also this other known host one here, that's the OpenSSL one. So that's actually not related to Autoscan Terminal. It's one that is for another program. Now, Autoscan Terminal expects the .txt to be on the end of the file. So now that we've said that this Medipath Sim with this fingerprint is a known server, when we log in using Autoscan Terminal, this one, so if we log in with Autoscan Terminal now, when we type in our Medipath password, assuming I get it right, that is, temp password, exclamation mark, we should now log in and be at the Medipath prompt. So again, just a reminder that this is not really a Medipath, it's just the text. Now, ordinarily, we would expect it to stop at user password. Now, the reason it doesn't is because, as I say, it's not a real Medipath server. It's only outputting the text, and just so you can get an idea, that's the text file. All it does is when it logs in is display that text file, which contains a normal Medipath login session. Okay, so that's logging in with a password. Now, ideally, we don't want to use a password. In fact, that's the way we're used to doing it. So when we start the existing terminal emulator, you just get straight through to the database login. That's what we want to do with this version, with this Autoscan terminal. With Autoscan Terminal, we want to be able to log in directly to the database without having to type any Unix level or Linux level user password. So the way to do that is to use public private key exchange, which SSH allows you to do. And what you can do is there's two approaches. What we need to do is create a private and public key pair, and we need the private key to be on the Windows computer, and we need the public key to be on the server. So there's two ways to do it. One is you can generate the key on the private key you can generate the private key on the Windows computer and then give the server the public key, or you can create the key on the server and then copy the private key to the Windows computer. Either way is fine. I'll just demonstrate both ways to do it, and then we'll probably just choose the host side. So we'll do it both ways. Then we'll use the host method just because it's one less step. But here's how we create the key from the Windows computer. Is we open up PowerShell. PowerShell knows how to generate keys, and it's the same command on either the host or the Windows or the host. Either way is fine. So you go SSH keygen, and that'll generate a private key. Now we'll see that it's trying to generate the key into the .ssh folder, which is good. That's the place we prefer, and it's also using the default name of ID_RSA, which is the default private key for a user in SSH. So we'll just accept that default. And in our case, we're going to protect the private key with our Windows credentials. So we don't want to put a separate password on the key. So we can just, again, accept the default, which is no password, and same again. So now that has generated an RSA 3072-bit key, private and public key pair. And if we have a look in the same folder we just looked in before for our hosts, bring that back up again, we'll now see that we've got the ID RSA, which is the private key, and we also have the ID RSA public key. Now this thinks it's publisher file, but that's just because Windows, I've got publisher installed on this machine. It's not really a publisher file at all. If I open with Notepad++, for example, to just see what's in there, we can see it doesn't really mean too much to us, but you can see that the public key is embedded in this file. So that's how you create the key on the Windows computer. So now what we would have to do is tell the server about this public key, or we can do it around the other way. So let's try the other approach, which is, we'll minimize that, and we'll also minimize that. Instead, since we're already on the server, we can actually, and as the Medipath user, if we have a look in our ls .ssh folder, you can see there's nothing in there. So again, we use the same command, SSH keygen. We should get pretty much the same message. Do we want to? Yes, we're going to save it into the SSH RSI. Again, default value, correct. Again, we're going to use Windows credential to protect our key, so we don't want to have an extra password on top of that. So again, we'll accept empty and empty. And we'll see that we've got a similar thing. We've got a 2048 bit key by default on this version of Linux. That's perfectly fine. So if we now do ls home.ssh, we can now see that we've got the private key and the public key generated. Now that we've generated the private and public keys on the server, we need to move the private key to the Windows computer. So remembering again, we could have used the private and public key that we generated on the Windows computer and moved the public key to the server. It's just for convenience sake, there's one step that is just a little bit easier on the host to do it this way. So that's the way we'll do it. So first we need to take our private key and put it on the Windows computer and put it into our SSH folder on users private SSH folder on the Windows computer. The simplest way to do that is to cat out the private key to the screen and then capture it and put it into a text file on the Windows computer. So it's just a text file, there's no, it's not binary or anything, so that's the easiest way to do it. So if we do cat home.ssh and we want ID_RSA, and so that's our key, and you see there's nothing much to it, so we just copy the whole thing including the message begin and end all the way there, and we can open up Notepad. Okay, paste the key in there, and then we want to save it with the correct name into the folder, into our SSH folder, so that Autoscan Terminal can read it. So what it does, if we save as the name of the remote host user, so in our case that's Medipath, at the name of the host, then ID RSA, then that will enable Autoscan Terminal to pick that up automatically from the user's SSH folder. So we'll just do that. So again, we'll go user profile and then go to SSH, and in here we've got known host and unknown host. We can say that we want to call this Medipath at Medipath_sim. So that is the username at Medipath_sim, and then we want to end that with .id_RSA. So if we do that, we now have a key that Windows knows about. Now, right at the moment, the host, even though the key was generated on there, the host doesn't know that that private key that we just copied on our computer is allowed to log in. So it doesn't know that the private key we just copied onto the Windows computer is allowed to authorize a login. So we have to tell the host that that private key is allowed to be used to log in with as Medipath. So the simplest way to do that is we could just get the public key and try and append it to the file manually, but there is a command that we can use that does that for us, and all we need to know is the password of the Medipath user, which we do know. So we can say SSH copy ID, and then we can say the name. We just say the name of the host, so that's Medipath_sim. That would work. However, again, because this is a demo system, Medipath_sim is actually not known as this address of this computer. So what we can actually say instead is we can say the IP address of this computer. So it's going to loop back to itself. So we can say 127.0.0.1. So what we're doing is we're copying the public key to the Medipath server. Now, the fact that we're on the Medipath server is not really important. It doesn't matter that we're actually telnetting from ourselves to ourselves, from this host to this host. It's just to go through the process of copying that public key. So we'll do that. And by default, it'll pick up our ID underscore. So the first thing you'll see here is this is a new server. As far as Medipath is concerned, it's never connected to itself. So it's asking us that same question again. Is it okay to connect to this host? And we know 127.0.0.1 is very safe. So yeah, we'll say yes to that. We haven't started copying the key yet. We've just allowed the connection to the host. And so now it's saying, what is the Medipath password? So remember, we put temp password exclamation as the password. And so now it says, okay, I've taken your default key, which is the id_rsa.pub, and put that into the SSH login file so that Medipath knows that this particular key is allowed to log in. And the evidence for that is if we do ls, again, home.ssh, we'll now see that there's this authorized keys file. So the authorized keys file contains the list of public keys that are allowed to authenticate the Medipath user. So you might have more than one of those. Perhaps you could have, say you had a Mac computer or another Linux computer or a Windows computer, and you generated a different private key. So instead of copying the keys around, you can just add that key also to the list. So at the moment, if we cat the authorized keys file, SSH authorized keys, you will see that basically what it said is that there's a SSH RSA key, and that's the public key for the one we just generated before on this machine, and it's saying that it's Medipath on the real host name of this server. So that's the step that is, if we'd done it, created the key on the Windows computer, this is the bit we would have had to modify to make that a little bit easier. So that is essentially it. So now that private key that we have on the Windows computer is allowed to authenticate the Medipath user. So having done all that now, if we exit out of the connection, okay, we've gone away again. So now when we restart Autoscan Terminal again, we should be able to log in without a password. Let's see what happens. Okay, we've got a bit of a problem here. We're still asking for a password, yet we have the key there and we've authorized it, so it's still asking for a password. So we've done something wrong. And as it turns out, I know what it is. It's when we saved with Notepad, Notepad very kindly put .txt at the end of our file, but it actually, the file extension is supposed to be id_rsa, not .text. So that's our problem. So Autoscan Terminal couldn't see that key in the folder. So now if we close this one and start up another one, and we can start this one here, now we should be able to log in all the way, which we do. Again, remembering that this is a simulated Medipath, we're not really logging in. We would normally have stopped at this user password little prompt so that you could put your user password in there. So again, we just got a text file that looks like it's Medipath here. Okay, and that is the user configuration done for the SSH. However, remembering we still get that temporary password in there, so I just need to go to a root user to get rid of that password of Medipath. So now if we go back to Telnet, if we now Telnet to the Medipath SIM server, we'll see that we want to log in as Medipath, and we shouldn't need the password any longer because we deleted that, and we can log in with Telnet. And if we log in using Autoscan Terminal using SSH, we should just log straight in with SSH. And that is the end of the user local computer configuration. What we want to do in the next video is to explain how you now deploy that to the enterprise so that you don't need to configure on every machine a private key and the security risks that might entail. So that'll be in the next video.